welcome back to our channel. The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke the night Ted learned the truth. Rain lashed the windows of the Dupree estate, the same windows that had once glowed with the illusion of luxury and control. Now, they reflected only chaos. Ted stood frozen in the dim light of his apartment, Eva's revelation still echoing in his mind like the aftershock of an explosion that refused to fade. Carlton and Leslie, two names that once commanded reverence, were now bound together by a secret so vile it rotted everything it touched. The woman Ted had trusted as the matriarch of the family, the man he had served loyally for years, had been locked in a relationship that defied morality and humanity. It wasn't just an affair, it was a calculated bond of greed and obsession, a pact sealed in manipulation and lies. And at the center of it all was Eva, unwitting, betrayed, and scarred by a truth too cruel to speak aloud. Ted's thoughts became a storm of their own. He saw fragments, Leslie's hand on Carlton's shoulder during a family meeting, the way their glances lingered a second too long, the strange silences when certain questions were asked. It all aligned now, horrifyingly perfect. They had used him, used everyone, to construct their empire of deceit. He had been their puppet, his loyalty twisted into complicity. Rage began to bloom inside him, slow and hot, like poison spreading through his veins. He felt betrayed not only by them but by himself. By his blindness, his faith in the system they built. Every moment of service, every act of protection, every sacrifice he had made for the Dupree family now felt like contamination. He could taste bile in his throat as the reality crystallized. He had been defending monsters. The rain outside grew heavier, pounding against the glass as if the sky itself was trying to drown the world in penance. Ted moved through the room, pacing like a caged animal. His mind couldn't find stillness, every thought collided with the next, building pressure. He saw Carlton's smug composure, Leslie's feigned elegance, their calculated cruelty disguised as sophistication. They had turned truth into currency, morality into a myth. In the darkness, Ted imagined confronting them, seeing their faces crack beneath the weight of exposure. But even that fantasy brought no peace. His anger wasn't simple, it was layered, sick with conflict. Beneath his fury lay grief, for the years lost, for the innocence betrayed, for the version of himself that believed in justice. He could feel something breaking inside him, something essential to his humanity. Eva's pale face haunted him. She had been the one to reveal it, her voice trembling but resolute, her eyes hollowed by the knowledge she carried. Ted had seen the cost of truth in her, the way it stripped her of everything except pain. In her confession, he found the reflection of his own ruin. They were both victims of the same deception, both trapped in the gravity of the Dupree curse. But where Eva sought escape, Ted sought destruction. He began to gather evidence, documents Eva had shown him, old records from Carlton's private files, photographs that proved Leslie's involvement in cover-ups and silenced scandals. The more he uncovered, the darker the picture became. They had manipulated stock markets, bribed officials, and destroyed anyone who threatened exposure. Even Eva's birth had been engineered, conceived not from love, but from the grotesque union of power and control. Ted's hands shook as he pieced it together, not from fear but from the unbearable weight of realization. Days blurred. Sleep became a memory. He lived in the glow of screens and the whisper of papers, surrounded by evidence of corruption. His reflection grew hollow, eyes sunken, movements sharp and erratic. The boundaries between justice and vengeance began to erode. He told himself that what he was doing was righteous, that the truth needed to be revealed, but deep inside, he knew it had become personal. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about retribution. He imagined the empire collapsing. The media swarm. The investors fleeing. The Dupree name dissolving in disgrace. But in every vision, he saw himself in the ruins too, burned, consumed by the same fire he lit. Still, he couldn't stop. Something inside him demanded it. They had destroyed his faith in everything sacred, and now he would destroy them. Leslie, in her fortress of denial, sensed the unraveling. Her poise began to fracture. She had built her world on secrecy, on the belief that she could control every outcome, every narrative. But control is an illusion that dies the moment truth begins to breathe. The whispers were spreading, her allies were withdrawing. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, and in the shadows, she could almost sense Ted's fury closing in like a storm she could not escape. Carlton, ever the strategist, tried to maintain the facade. But his empire was bleeding from every direction. Lawsuits emerged, journalists circled, former partners began to talk. The Dupree legacy was rotting from the inside out. He told himself it was temporary, that he could buy silence again, twist perception again. But the rot was too deep, and the vultures too many. Ted became a ghost within their world, moving through their circles unseen. He watched from the edges of charity galas, business meetings, social gatherings, every smile they offered now dripping with falseness. He saw the fear growing in their eyes, the subtle panic behind their masks. It was intoxicating, and terrifying. The more their world decayed, the more Ted realized he was tied to it. His rage gave him purpose, but that purpose was eating him alive. When the collapse finally came, it was swift and merciless. Financial scandals, leaked recordings, secret affairs, all exposed in a matter of days. The press devoured it. The Dupree estate was raided, their assets frozen, their names dragged through mud. Leslie's perfectly curated life disintegrated under public scorn, Carlton's empire turned to dust. Eva vanished from the public eye, disappearing into silence. Ted watched it all unfold with a numb kind of satisfaction, the catharsis of seeing justice, or something like it, fulfilled. But when the noise faded, when the dust settled, he found no peace waiting. The fire he had started still burned inside him, consuming everything it touched. He had destroyed them, but in doing so, he had destroyed himself. His obsession had become his identity, his vengeance his only companion. Nights stretched long and merciless. He wandered through what remained of the estate, rooms stripped bare, windows shattered, the echo of grandeur long gone. The storm had passed, but its aftermath was worse than the chaos. In the silence, he could still hear Leslie's laughter, Carlton's commanding tone, Eva's trembling confession. They lingered like ghosts, tethered to him by the gravity of shared ruin. He had become the thing he despised, a creature defined by deceit and destruction. The truth had freed no one, it had only revealed the rot that lived in all of them. He realized too late that some secrets, once unearthed, do not purify, they corrode. Ted stood in the great hall, staring at the shattered chandelier, the floor littered with fragments of crystal that once reflected light across the walls. Now they reflected only him, fractured, incomplete, unrecognizable. The storm outside had quieted, leaving behind a stillness that felt like judgment. He understood then that evil did not die with exposure. It simply changed form, found new hosts, new reasons. And maybe now, it lived in him. He turned away from the ruins, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the hollow space where an empire had once ruled. The Dupree name was finished, but its curse remained, a legacy of lies, of ambition, of people who mistook power for love and control for safety. As the morning light crept through the broken windows, Ted felt the weight of everything he had done. The truth had been his weapon, but also his undoing. He had torn down gods only to become a ghost. And in the silence that followed, the world moved on, oblivious, indifferent, as it always had. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors, haunted, hollow, and chained to the memory of what they destroyed. The house stood in silence, emptied of everything except memory. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy with the scent of damp wood and smoke. Ted wandered through the ruins of the Dupree estate like a man who had survived a war only to find the victory meaningless. Every portrait on the wall, every broken piece of glass seemed to stare back at him, asking if the truth had been worth the cost. Eva returned days later, her face pale, her eyes hollow but resolute. She found Ted sitting in the main hall, surrounded by papers and fragments of their past. The fury that had once driven him was gone, replaced by a kind of exhausted silence. The empire had fallen, the monsters exposed, but so had the last fragile pieces of who they once were. She didn't speak, and he didn't look up. Words had lost their purpose long ago. Between them hung the weight of everything that could not be undone, the betrayal, the deaths, the choices that had dragged them both into darkness. Ted felt her presence behind him like a shadow of mercy he didn't deserve. In her eyes, he saw not forgiveness, but recognition. They had both been victims of the same truth, and now both were remnants of it. Outside, dawn began to break over the hills, pale and cold. Light spilled through the shattered windows, falling across Ted's face as if to remind him that morning still existed, that the world continued even after ruin. He closed his eyes and let the light touch him, fragile and distant. Somewhere deep within, beneath the ashes of rage and guilt, a thought flickered, that perhaps survival was its own form of punishment, and also the only chance at redemption. Eva turned to leave. Ted did not stop her. He remained there, still as stone, listening to the quiet heartbeat of a house that would never breathe again. And when the last echo of her footsteps faded, only the wind remained, carrying the ghosts of the Dupree name into a future that no one would ever dare to speak of again.